Oil tankers in world oil transit. Some advantages for these oil tankers is how conveniently they can transport oil. These ships are so massive they can ship up to millions of barrels around the world. There are plenty of places for these ships to make stops in order to make pickups and deliveries. Another advantage, other than the ship itself, is how they create jobs on the harbors for those that have to reload the ships. They are also more eco-friendly, and we don't have to use plenty of planes and trucks to transport it around countries. Some disadvantages, however, are the oil spills, and these oil spills cause great amounts of pollution to the water and environment. It destroys many of our habitats and much of the wildlife. These tankers also use a lot of fuel to travel across the ocean. One other major disadvantage is the time it takes to make these. It can take up to 5 years of labor just to make one. These ships are also built in a wide variety of sizes. They range from anywhere to 10,000 to 180,000 metric tons of dead weight. These ships also have to travel through choke points. The tankers are built long and narrow in order to stay on their sea routes, which are very narrow. There are 7 specific routes that these tankers use in order to transport oil around the world.
The Strait of Hormuz accounts for about 30% of all seaborne traded oil. In 2013, this probably amounted to about 7 to 17 million barrels per day last year. The location of this strait is pretty critical in it, being for the fact that it's located between the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf. The biggest advantage for this fact is that it's the only passage from the Persian Gulf that opens directly to the open ocean. Iran sits on the north coast of this strait, and on the south coast sits the United Arab Emirates and Mussadam. The strait is massive, with its narrowest area being the 21 nautical miles wide. For it being so massive, it needs a huge traffic separation scheme, with one inbound lane and one outbound lane. Each lane is 2 miles wide, with somewhat of a median and buffer zone in the middle separating the lanes. This allows a safety precaution so there are no collisions between ships or boats. Under transit passage provisions, any vessel or aircraft is allowed to go through any area as long as it is going through economic or personal gains. Not every country has ratified this, but most countries do follow this law. There is huge traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, with about 85% of the crude oil that went to Asia coming through the Strait of Hormuz. Besides importing, there is also exporting, with Qatar exporting about 3.7 trillion cubic feet last year of liquefied natural gas. However, with a lot of traffic, there is also a lot of tension being built. Tension between Iran and the United States has been built with battles between boats of each country. With it possibly escalating into military conflict, the Iranian government threatened to shut off the entire Strait of Hormuz. This made crude oil prices all around the world rise by 2 to 4%. With pressures from the United States and the other countries around the world, there were sanctions set up, and eventually Iran did calm down and go back on their previous statements about closing the strait. Pipelines are used to export and import petroleum products besides going through the strait. Saudi Arabia has about 746 miles of petrol line. This petrol line transports crude products all the way around the strait and can circumnavigate. This way, the operational pipelines can go around, and that way, just in case the strait does ever get shut off, they can import and export natural gas and crude oil products. Besides a few major pipelines, there are a lot of other pipelines, but most of them are out of order. Damages from oil, disagreements between countries, and sanctions put in are some of the reasons why some of these pipelines are not in commission.
The Strait of Malacca is located in between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, being the shortest sea route that links the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, thus making it one of the world's most important strategic choke points by volume of oil transit. China and Indonesia are two of the fastest growing economies in the world. The strategic location of the Malacca Strait impacts the economies of the two countries. China relies on the money from exports through the strait to invest in energy for their country. In 2011, Indonesia and Singapore were amongst the top Southeast Asian net oil importers, with Singapore having the most barrels per day met by net imports, and Indonesia surpassing all other Southeast Asian countries in consumption. As you can see, the Malacca Strait has impacted these two countries and helped in aiding them to being two of the fastest growing economies in the world. As you can see in this image, the oil flow through these Southeast Asian countries happens to run right through the Malacca Strait. If the strait were to be blocked off and no vessels could utilize this waterway, then countries would have troubles with the products they import or export through the strait. There would be about 60,000 vessels in 1 year that would have to take a new route, taking them basically through the small Indonesian countries, costing more time and money to the countries. The blockage of the strait would affect economies and even people's everyday lives. The Strait of Malacca plays a major role in how countries thrive on imports and exports and on individual families as well.
Construction on the Suez Canal began in ancient Egypt. Plans to build a water route from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea have been around for thousands of years. There is always a need for goods to be transported from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean from the various countries around the area. The first attempt to connect the two seas was around 1860 BC. The canal was neglected after it was first being built, and the project was started up again under the rule of Necho II around 610 BC. The canal was abandoned and rebuilt off and on again for hundreds of years. Napoleon Bonaparte actually tried to complete the canal in 1799, but his engineers encountered problems with the sea level. They believed that the Red Sea sea level was higher than the Mediterranean sea level, so the tides would affect how the canal was being built. The first part of the modern canal was finished in 1862, and the entire thing was opened for international navigation in 1869. The canal begins in the Mediterranean Sea at Point Said and goes through Ismailia, Egypt, and ends up at Suez, which is located on the Gulf of Suez and the Red Sea. The canal is 101 miles long and is estimated to have cost around $100 million to complete. 20,000 workers were drafted every 10 months to work on the canal, which is a total of 240 workers over the 10-year period. Today, the canal is operated by the Suez Canal Authority. Construction of the Suez-Mediterranean Pipeline, also known as the SUMED Pipeline, began in the mid-1970s, and the pipeline became operational in 1977. There are two pipelines parallel to each other that are 200 miles long that have the capacity to transport up to 2.3 million barrels of crude oil per day. At each end of the pipeline, there are storage containers that can hold up to 24 million barrels of oil. The SUMED pipeline is solely used for transporting crude oil. This allows the Suez Canal to have less traffic so it can be more efficient in transporting other goods.